Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. In the sanctuary, as you go in, off to the left, you will see windows that have scenes from the life and teachings of Jesus. And among them, there is a window that has a picture of Jesus healing a man who was born blind. There's an big eye up at the top, the eye of God overseeing the whole thing, but it also calls attention simply to the miracle which had to do with someone's eyes being opened. There's also a picture of some mud in the middle of it, and that will make sense if you don't already know the story. If you listen to this, I'll put the picture of the window up again while I read this story, which comes to us from John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind, so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed, and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now, it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who's a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He's a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So, for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I've told you already, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses. But as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here's an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Think for a minute about what it would be like to be an adult, having been born blind and having lived your life for a couple decades at least, and then suddenly, one day, unexpectedly, to have your sight. However, it came back to you. Well, it wouldn't actually have come back to you because it wasn't something you had ever lost. It was something that was completely and utterly new to you. So, all around you would be things that you would recognize only by touch, people that you would know only by their voices, foods you would know only by their taste and their texture, flowers you would know only by their scent. It would be so confusing. It would be so weird. I mean, how would you know what anything even is? Uh, Look, here's a cup of coffee. Um, how do I know it? Well, it feels like it. It tastes like it, but how do I know where I can put it down? What's that thing over there? Um, Somebody would have to help you learn other really basic things. What are colors? I mean, there's this stuff out there, and it's on the ground. I guess that's the ground, and well, let's call it grass, and it looks different from the dirt. Why? Because it just does. The dirt is, what do you call that? Is that yellow? Is that brown? And the grass is green, but so are the. It's not just one color. It's a lot of different shades of, I guess, shades you call it, of green. Is it all green? Um, the stuff up there, it's sky, but you can't. I have no idea what it is. I've never seen it. I mean, you can't touch it. But part of whatever that is they tell me blue, but it looks kind of gray at the moment. If that's what gray is, is it blue or is it gray? Is it gray or is it blue? Some of it's kind of whitish. Somebody would have to teach you all that stuff, and it would be terrifying. And then there would be all these things like hand gestures, ways that people with sight communicate, but you don't know and you don't get it. I mean, even if you see what's happening and you know these are fingers, sometimes going like this means two, and sometimes it means peace. Is that connected somehow? How are you supposed to know that? Um, Somebody's going to have to tell you while you're there looking, figuring out the color of the sky. Don't look at the sun. Would you worry that when night falls and all that gets dark again, would you worry that it it's you losing your sight once more, having that gift taken back? Nobody else seems worried about what's going on. Do you show your fear? Speaking for myself, if I had been born blind, I don't know whether I could handle that and all of the rest of it coming at me all at once. Some interpreters of this passage think that fear of such a sudden and drastic change, even when it comes from good news, is in part what this part of the Gospel of John is about. This man is given his sight when he hadn't had it, and he's given a whole new aspect to his life um, that wasn't there before. And what's going on in the Gospel of John is that a lot of other people are experiencing something similar, not physically, but in the way that they live their lives. The arrival of the Messiah is good news, but it shifted a lot of lives around in a lot of ways that are reflected in John's account of this miracle, not just in the ways that I'm imagining or thinking about what it means to get your sight, but the arrival of the Messiah changed the religious life of the world. The book seems to have been written at a point where a community that was centered on Jesus and his teachings and his life and all that that meant to them, and another community, the one that they came out of, the one that they were part of, the one that would become Judaism as we now know it, those two communities were splitting apart. And we see it in this text. John refers to the Jews as if they were a separate group in a way that Jesus himself would not have done. And we read things like the Jews had already agreed, that is, that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That already agreed sounds like it was a present reality for the people that John was writing for, the people with whom he needed to share the story of this amazing event in the blind man's life. And when he says that the man's parents were frightened of being put out of the synagogue, and that their son did indeed have that exact thing happen to him, the hearers of this story would have understood the fears that come from news, even good news, even amazing news, news like what it's like to be given your sight, but news that nonetheless makes you reassess everything and rethink everything about your life. The whole group of people who had come to confess Jesus as the Messiah were facing a whole new world themselves. Some of them would no longer be welcome in the synagogue, in the setting that had given shape to their faith, in the setting that had given meaning to their lives. And none of them, having lost that, were ready to become part of the pagan cultures that surrounded them in other ways and that made up the rest of the society and the world that they knew. They were facing a new chapter in the way they lived. They were facing a new situation in every way, one that was confusing, that was disorienting, one where they had to find new language for things that they hadn't understood before, one in which they were trying to say, oh, this is what that meant. This is what uh, David in the Psalms were talking about. Uh, this is what Isaiah may have had in mind. Doesn't it sound like that to you? They were trying to work out things by analogy. They were trying to put together what it meant that they had these individual and then they had these shared experiences, and it was confusing and it was dangerous. Pushed by the Pharisees to distance himself from Jesus, the man born blind wouldn't do it. He kept expressing his gratitude. He kept giving Jesus credit for his newfound sight. And he said, I don't know whether he's a sinner, meaning somebody who would break the Sabbath in order to heal somebody. But he did insist, one thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. And his experience of being pushed on this, in fact, just made him more defiant about it. They wanted him to back off a little bit, but he would not do it. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I've told you already, and you weren't listening. Here he is. He was blind, they're half deaf. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? They don't seem to have cared too much for that kind of an answer, for that kind of a response. Jesus really does change people in profound ways. And not just then, but now. When he shows us a new way to view the world, a new way to see the world, whether with physical eyes or the eyes of faith. But when that happens, there can be this loss that goes with it that turns out to be a gain in the long run. But that moment of disconnection suddenly from the things that you have known, from the way that things have been done, and people sometimes have to wrestle with that a little bit, more than a little bit for some. The Journey of the Magi, which is a poem written by T.S. Eliot, imagines what it must have been like later in life for one of the wise men who had visited Jesus when he was born. And this wise man, having returned to Persia, where he came from, having gone home to what's now Iran, looks back on his encounter with the child Jesus, and he tries to make sense of it, and he owns up to how he himself was changed. In Eliot's poem, he says, "All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was birth, certainly. We had evidence, and no doubt I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods." To meet Jesus is to become less comfortable with the way things are or the way we thought they were. To meet Jesus, to be touched by him, to have your eyes opened by him, is no longer to accept the terms that the world dictates. And that's going to mean questioning, and it's going to mean rejecting a lot of what we're taught in favor of Jesus' new teachings, new ways of life that he outlines that are utterly astonishing to people who have never considered them. And he knows that it involves some unlearning as well as some learning. The Sermon on the Mount says, for example, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Didn't everybody learn that on the playground? Stand up for yourself. Uh, But I say to you, Jesus said, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Yeah, there's a whole lot more of that in the Sermon on the Mount. And none of it is especially practical. And all of it involves unlearning a few things. It's as if Jesus gives this vision of the world with its beauty and with its grandeur and with its breadth and with all that lies within it. But then he also asks us to find new ways of living in that world. Not the world that we had grown used to, but in the world to which he opens our eyes. A world he called the kingdom of God. I like the way that Rachel Held Evans summarizes Jesus' vision of that kingdom in her book, Searching for Sunday. So I'm going to give her the last word on all of this. And she gives the last word to Jesus. She says, in contrast to every other kingdom that has been and ever will be, this kingdom belongs to the poor, Jesus said, and to the peacemakers, the merciful, those who are hungry and thirsty for God. In this kingdom, the people from the margins and the bottom rungs will be lifted up to places of honor, seated at the best spots at the table. This kingdom knows no geographical boundaries, no political parties, no single language or culture. It advances not through power or might, but through love and joy and peace. Missions of mercy and kindness and humility. This kingdom has arrived, not with a trumpet sound, but with the baby's cries, not with the vanquishing of enemies, but with the forgiving of them, not on the back of a war horse, but on the back of a donkey, not with triumph and a conquest, but with a death and a resurrection. Amen.